Right.
Yeah.
Good evening and welcome to the Averill Park Central School District Board of Education meeting on this Monday, February 6, 2023. Our first meeting actually of this year because of the district being closed to a snowstorm for the last meeting. Let's please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. All right, we'll jump right into our superintendent's report.
All right, good evening. So a little bit of a lengthy report. As you mentioned, we have not met in a little while. So I'll try to make it as brief as possible, but we want to hit on some important things. First of all, the district is again featuring on social media a Black History Month activity or event that's happened in our district each day in February to celebrate this month. We want to make sure people are aware of that. We did it last year as well and had some really positive feedback. As you know, if you were reading emails today, we had some challenging weather again and some impact here. And really the reason I wanted to put this on was largely to thank our building and ground staff publicly for their work. So for those who were at the basketball game Friday night, the power outages and the brownouts started Friday night, which led to the issues with the heat, obviously. Coils broke, which led to pipes, which led to water. We had people on staff Friday night, all day Saturday, and all day Sunday in an effort to make sure we were open today. So we just really wanted to acknowledge our building and grounds crew who always are coming in to keep us from being in much worse shape than we could have been. And a lot of damage was mitigated through their hard work. And we also wanted to make sure we thank the community too. The recently passed capital project referendum has a emergency generator in it for this high school, which is really important, not only for the high school, but the internet and the phones all go through this building. So when we're out of power here, it has the capability to shut down the entire district. So it is really important for that generator. So we're thankful that we're going to be able to get that in. I believe it's scheduled for not this summer, but next summer. Something coming up here. We have a really great event that we're excited about. Thanks to Heath and Rob at the middle school and the high school for leading this for us. It's a virtual assembly with a Holocaust survivor. And we're very excited. She has been presenting at schools, I believe, throughout the country. She's all over and really kind of considers it her mission to get this message out, because she knows there's fewer and fewer people as this generation passes. So she's very, very, very well respected, and we've had great feedback from people, and we're excited about this.
We're having trouble hearing you.
I don't think so. It sounds like your mic's not on.
It's on. All right.
Oh, that's better.
Might have to read it. Bend it toward you a little.
There. You want me to start from the beginning?
No.
No.
Take two. We're going to go back. So looking forward to that presentation, which is coming up in February. Conference Day on January 27th was a big day for us, and we always like to thank the board for their support of those days, making sure that we have that time in our calendar. And we really felt like we used the time wisely. The feedback we received has been positive, and you can kind of look through there in terms of some of the things that were done. A lot of focus on our common formative assessments and that data work, as well as the K-5 level, really, as it says, getting immersed in science. We brought in science specialists from Questar from our local BOCEs, who really helped us in terms of diving into those new standards and doing some really important work there. And then our special education teachers, counselors, psychs, and the related service professionals spending some time working on goal development for their annual IEP writing process. So a lot of important work gets done in those days, and we just want to make sure the board's aware of it and appreciate that time and realizing how important that is for us. Staying on the instructional side, we're excited about a unique opportunity for some of our teachers to participate in a pilot that's going to really look at how to reimagine some of our instructional space. I know this is something that's near and dear to Matt's heart, and Heath and Rob have been working closely with us. We're going to pilot this out. We're looking for up to 5 teachers from each building to work on this using some furniture, and it's providing professional development around it. So you're not just getting the furniture, but you're getting the professional development around that as well. And always important to talk about the funding, especially as we head into budget season. This is all being paid for through stimulus funds. And we like those type of projects because they're one-offs that don't have continuing reoccurring costs. Going back to the weather theme for a moment, we are out of emergency days. So we have tried to proactively lay out some preliminary plans so that we have the capability to pivot to remote learning. We obviously want to have that capability ready and if necessary and if needed and if possible, pivot that way. It is harder depending on the age group and the level, right? Obviously K-5 more challenging than our secondary students. But if we have some advance notice, we have an idea that some weather is coming in, we will message that out, break down our Chromebook carts and try and get that information out so people are ready and really in an effort to try and preserve those vacation days because we know that if we have them, if we have days of attendance, we're going to lose students. And if we lose students and attendance down, it's really going to impact instruction. So it is an instructionally based decision to make sure that we are prepared and taking advantage of this, what was once a pilot, but is now part of SCD's regulations that you're allowed to do this. Our district website, being the platform that we use, as these things always change, is no longer being supported. So we just want to make folks aware that we're going to take the time to redesign our website. Questar actually has a website design service. So they do this for districts throughout the BOCES, and we're going to take advantage of that service. So look for some changes to our website as we move forward and hoping to roll that out for July 1, I believe. And then finally on the report, pleased to share information from our insurance carrier, Utica National, that we have once again achieved titanium with honors level. As it says there, it is the 10th year. It's the highest level award, and the district has made it a habit of winning this award. So we're very proud of that fact. We appreciate all the people who have a part in this, which is really everyone. Aaron Hefner and his team put the application together for us, and it is something that we do value. And as it says in there, enjoyable and productive work environment for staff, a comfortable and pleasant experience for visitors, and a safe and secure learning environment for our students. So certainly something to be proud of. We appreciate everyone's efforts in making that a reality. So moving on from the news and notes, we'll move to our celebration of success. All right, and that concludes the superintendent's report. Thank you.
Excellent, thank you. That brings us to the stimulus fund update.
So I believe this is probably the 5th time that we've done a stimulus update. We may have another one left in us as stimulus funding is coming to an end shortly. This is a requirement by New York State to just publicly update where we are with spending of the money that we received. So some of this will be repeat, and then I'll just give a quick update where we've been since I think it was October was when we last presented it. As you recall, there are 2 funding sources as part of our stimulus funds. There's what we call ARP and CRISA, totaling $4.64 million. This was funds that we received back in 2020. There are restrictions on how that funding can be used. Certain pools of money have to be used for certain reasons. Other pools are a little more open-ended. We have been trying to be careful of how we've used those funds over the past couple of years. As Jim said, those one-time costs are far more advantageous because they're spend it, forget it type of costs versus ongoing costs tied to staffing or long-term programs. So we've tried to do a mix of those so that we're not heading for a cliff with everything that we spend our stimulus money on. The money does expire. One of the funds will be expiring at the end of September of this year. That's the CRISA funds. And ARP funds, we still have another year on, so we still will be funding some things into next school year as well. There are priorities. If you recall, we kind of broke things into 5 buckets that we were spending our money on. Supporting academic growth really dealt with a lot of the learning loss or so-called learning loss that we came out of COVID with, and making sure that we have the supports there for our students to be academically successful as they return to school full time. We also want to coordinate our social emotional learning efforts across the district, making sure that the needs, not just academic, but the mental and social well-being of our students was being taken care of as they return. Promoting the effective use of technology. We learned how critical that was during closure, so we had funds to make sure that we are supporting both in and out of school what students can do with technology. Developing the capacity of our instructional staff, taking opportunities to provide professional development in ways that we weren't able to prior to receiving this money. So some of those one-stop shop type PD opportunities to really enrich our staff. And then COVID logistics, they continued after we received the money. We did spend a fair amount on maintaining some of the things that we had to do during COVID, air purifiers, filters, things like that were there. Some of our storage needs, some of the furniture needs and such. There's very few things left in the stimulus items. From the giant list that we started with 2 years ago, we're really down to, I would say, 3 major buckets that we will have beyond this school year. As Jim mentioned, we are doing a furniture pilot in our middle school and high school. That will eat a large portion of our furniture budget that we had in our stimulus funds on the CRISA side. Again, it's a great opportunity to spend some money right now. There won't be a recurring cost. That money has to be spent by the end of September anyways. Along those lines, we're also doing some technology purchases. We're buying something called Vivi, which has been a big hit in our district. It allows for teachers and students to display their screens wirelessly in a classroom, so you don't have to walk up and plug in a cable. So we're starting to realize what that does for instruction. It's been a great hit in the buildings that we've done it, so we're going to expand it to district-wide, taking advantage of some of the funding for that. We will continue our AMS Cares program for 1 more school year, so next school year will be the final year that we'll be able to do that with stimulus funds. That's an after-school program to support some of our needs of students who need a little bit extra motivation in terms of completing work, getting that extra support that they need. Maybe students that don't have time during the day, they can come in after school and work with teachers. It was a program that existed years ago that went away. We were able to bring it back with the stimulus funds. And we're going to maintain 4 salaries next year as well. So we'll have 1 more year of paying for specific positions in the stimulus funds. There's going to be a little bit of a shift in how we do it next year. Up to this point, there's been a lot of movement with stimulus. You really do need a roadmap to follow who's getting paid out of stimulus, because some people who have a position created by stimulus are actually being paid out of local, but the person who replaced that is out of stimulus. It's been a lot of moving parts and pieces. It gets very confusing. So next year, we're going to try to simplify. We are going to put anything that's truly mandated. We have some special ed positions in stimulus that we want to move in the local budget for next year, because we know we're going to need those positions even after the stimulus money goes away. Some of the positions that aren't necessarily mandated or required by the state are going to be in the stimulus. So we're going to move AIS. It's obviously something we feel very strongly in and will strongly advocate for at this time next year. But they are positions that by state requirements aren't needed, like a special ed position. So it'll be very clean to see what positions we're going to be looking to bring back in the local budget and why next year. So I think it's a good move to try to clarify the impact of stimulus and how it's important that we bring those positions back home. You'll see as we talk about, when I come up here again in a few minutes, we'll be talking about positions that are currently in the stimulus that aren't being funded next year. And we now have to make a decision about bringing them back in the local budget or eliminating the position. So that's the downside of the positions that we support. We've been able to do great things, but it is a temporary position because of the stimulus funding. Some of the next steps as we wrap this process up, we'll manage the remaining funds for Carissa. That started at $2.64 million. We'll make sure we spend every dollar of it because it was awarded to us by the federal government, and we want to make sure we take full advantage of it. So we'll manage those funds as we close that out in September. We'll continue to evaluate positions and programs included in either allocation for inclusion in local budget eliminations, kind of what I just talked about. It's not just people, it's also programs. We do have programs that have been stimulus funded for the last year or two, and we'll see try to determine the value of bringing that back into the local budget for next year. And then fun times in June, we will be audited by New York State on our education stimulus fund monitoring program that a lot of schools are doing. We were one of the few that are getting an on-site visit. More than half have to do it virtually. We will have someone here that will be working with us for a couple months. So we anticipate that's going to take a bit of a toll on us in terms of providing paperwork, documentation, backups. So they'll start that in June. Hopefully we did everything right. This is one of the things that we knew that they would come asking about, and we've been really diligent about making sure that our public understands how we're using these funds. So this will be certainly part of what they'll be looking for. As always with our stimulus funds, public comments can be emailed to arpa@apcsd.org. We also still have maintained our website on our federal stimulus funds. Any questions from the board about stimulus funding as of today?
Oh, wait here, other presentation.
Okay, that's fine. We'll see you in a few.
Yeah. Do you guys have any questions?
It's not surprising at all, but I appreciate the attentiveness along the way. And I'm sure there's a self-serving aspect of it because it would be horrible at the end, but it's a good example to set for our students for sure. So.
Thanks.
That's right. Thank you, Matt.
Thanks.
That brings us to our first public comment period of the evening. This public comment is limited to topics on the agenda. We will have a second public comment period later if folks are interested, and you would need to fill out a blue sheet to be acknowledged to speak, and I have no blue sheets at this time. Okay. That brings us to item number 5, to approve the minutes of the December 12th meeting. Megan makes a motion, Adam seconds, discussion. Hearing none, we'll call it to a vote. All those in favor? Passes unanimously, thank you. And that brings us to item number 6, but I'd like to ask for a motion to approve items number 6, 7, 8, the consent items for business, personnel, and special education. Megan makes a motion. And seconds, discussion. Megan?
I just want to thank the Averill Park Education Foundation once again. They continually support us, and the donation for the anti-bullying presentations is huge, and we appreciate them. So thank you.
There's one person in the room, just the retirement, the folks who've been, we got 24, are you on it? I can't. Am I still in thunder? I'm
Yeah,
sorry.
that's fine. No, it's a huge list of people who are retiring, and we definitely need to acknowledge them because I think it's super important.
Yeah, and I mean, you did the math. I was like, I can't do that math in my head there. But, so,
Go ahead.
well, it's an average of 25 years. All right, Susan Ford, 20 years. Tracy Hacker, 24. Averill Liberté, 30 years. Jennifer Mallory, 21.5. I'm gonna screw this up. Puglisi, Dave Puglisi, 30 years. Christine Sears, 30. Michelle Sneed, 28 years. Carol Winkley, 21. Susan Raymond, 23. Is it Teal?
Yes,
Teal.
yeah.
So it's like,
Yeah.
Lauren Teal, 24, and Kimberly Valen, 22. That's 273.5 years.
That's a lot.
That's a lot of work.
That's
That's a lot of
a
kids,
lot of
you guys.
knowledge
That's no
exiting.
joke. Seriously, that's what makes the whole thing work, right? It's not about us, it's about you guys.
Yes.
Thank you.
I did want to also acknowledge the people who are retiring and thank you for your service to the district for all those years and congratulations on your retirement and we obviously wish you the best of luck in it. Yeah. Yeah. And that is 273 years is a little long. It's a lot of knowledge.
That's a lot of FTEs.
Yeah.
There's a lot of
That's a lot.
I also wanted to thank the Averill Park Youth Basketball for their donation of the basketball jerseys. And then I also wanted to thank Hannaford Helps for their donation to our school. So I want to make sure we acknowledge all those because we have a lot going on, but yep. All right, is there any other discussion? Okay, and we'll call it to the vote. All those in favor? Approved unanimously. Thank you. That brings us to our 2023-2024 budget presentation. First up is instructional. That's what it says on the agenda. You want to
I wasn't
switch
prepared.
around? Okay, sorry.
Sorry about that. Yeah,
Sorry, go ahead, Gary.
That's our fault.
You can jump over Matt. and-
Oh,
Yeah, good job. We'll stay in order of what we were supposed to go last minute.
she's over there like, phew,
Now you relax for a few more minutes.
All right, so I guess we're kicking it off with the non-instructional presentation for tonight. And we're gonna start with operations and maintenance. So the first thing we're gonna look at is the custodial staffing within this department. This slide is very similar to what I presented to you last year. The top part of the chart, we look at by building, the staffing we have. For day shift in each of our buildings, we have one custodial on staff during the day. Second shift, it varies by size of the building and between secondary and elementary. And then on the weekend shift, we have at the secondary buildings. GW is a little bit different than the buildings we have that our students attend because of the way they split the work up. So they just have one in the morning and one in the second, one day, one second shift. When I presented this last year at the high school, on the second shift, we had 5 FTE. Through the budget process last year, we increased that by 2. We did that in 2 different ways. One, we added 1 FTE to the high school. And then the second thing we did is we took a vacant cleaner/grounds position and just repurposed that to the high school. So we were able to increase from 5 to 7 at the high school last year. At the bottom part of the chart, we look at the square footage per building. And really what we're trying to gauge is the square footage per each of our night cleaners to kind of get an idea of what we call them the sections that they're responsible at night to see equity across the buildings and the fact that they can get their buildings clean. So when you look at the second shift per square foot for employee for 21-22 at the high school, this is 42,000. This is where we were last year before we made the adjustment. And if you look at the bottom, all the rest of the schools stayed the same because we didn't make any FT adjustments. So last year when we looked at staffing, we focused on the high school and Algonquin because you can see compared to the elementaries, their square footage per employee was a little bit higher. Last year we decided to focus to make the staffing adjustments at the high school. It's the biggest building, but it's also the busiest at night in terms of our custodians have to set up events, the athletic events that are happening. So we made the adjustments there, and after that adjustment, it brought their square footage down to 30,000, which is a little bit more in line with where the elementaries are. So, and we have this year seen a big improvement in terms of the cleanliness of the building overnight. So we made that adjustment last year, but now when you look across the bottom line, you can see Algonquin's the outlier, right? So you can tell where this is going. So our recommendation this year is to focus at Algonquin, and the second shift to increase that by 1 FTE. If we do that, it'll bring Algonquin down to 36, more in line with the other buildings. Not totally where we want to be, but a big improvement for where we are. So that's the FTE ask in O&M. In addition to FTE, a big budget pressure is still our heating fuel. If you look at 21-22, last year we had a huge spike in terms of our heating fuel cost. This year, 22-23, our trend is continuing in a similar fashion. So there's no indication right now that that's going to change going into next year. So we're going to have to increase that budget line a little bit more. Again, we did a bump this year. There's a transfer on the board tonight for a higher amount. So we're going to bump that again for next year because we didn't bump it enough. We were kind of hoping maybe it would start high and drift off, but that hasn't happened yet. So that's one adjustment that we're going to have to make. And then just overall cost of materials, inflationary pressures. This was a theme every department, non-instructional and instructional. So we've made small adjustments in terms of the materials and supplies as well. The other ask we have this year is for equipment for our grounds department. And you can see the 3 pieces of equipment that we're asking for up there. When you look at our grounds department, we have 3 employees who are responsible for just under 69 acres, including 11th athletic fields that they have to prep and strike for each of our athletic games, our football fields, or soccer fields, or baseball fields. They fix the mounds when they need to be built. So they do a lot of work with the number of staff that we have. And we're very appreciative of their skill set. But instead of asking for FTE for this department right now, we're asking for tools to allow them to do their jobs more efficiently and quicker and better. So that's our ask for the grounds department.
And I think too, Carrie, to point out the historic part of this is that department in particular was one that took a hit during the bad budget years and never rebounded because we've always tried to build back the instructional side. I think last year is probably the first time we've added FTE in that department. We're still tremendously understaffed when we look at industry average and those type of numbers. But we have extremely hardworking, dedicated folks. As mentioned, the people who were in this weekend during the issues we had here. So there's just a little historical context of that department being hit and not really ever coming back. So trying to slowly bring them up to speed a little bit.
And then even when moving to our maintenance, again, another very fortunate department that we have. We have very skilled workers in our maintenance department. And as best we can, we try to have them do projects in-house rather than outsourced to contractors, which just saves us a significant amount of money. So the 22-23 side, you can see work that they have done and then work that they're planning to do over the breaks. And when you look at the installed drainage at the JV softball field, that's also in conjunction with our grounds department. So our grounds also does help in some of these larger projects as well. So when we build the budget for 23-24, we try to identify some of these smaller projects that we can do in-house with the skill sets that we have. So these are things that we've built in some materials and supplies in order to try to address next year with our staff. In addition to the in-house projects, we also want to continue with the 100,000 capital outlay project. You can see the prior couple years what we've done. This current year was the 1201 high school special education classroom. That was renovated over Christmas break, and that's actually a picture of it down there. So we had some asbestos removal, redid the flooring, and then some cabinetry. The second part of that is the fencing for athletic fields. That's going to be bid. Hopefully within the next couple of weeks, we're going to get that out to bid for the fencing. When we look at next year, we've discussed some options with the facilities committee, but we haven't narrowed it down to what project exactly we want to put forward. So we're still examining options, but we do want to make sure we set aside that money because it's a nice way to take care of some of these smaller projects around the district.
And Carrie, again, before you leave that one, to jump in, remember that was something we built in a few years ago. You take the hit the first year of the $100,000, then you get the 8 on that in the following year. So unlike the capital project, which is a whole different way of doing business, with those $100,000 projects in the general fund, you get the 8 the following year. So we feel it's important to keep that in when possible because now we're generating the 8 and now it's essentially paying for itself because of our aid ratio, not completely, but 70,
79%, yeah.
A large percentage is coming back to us. So it's something we want to keep up. And those are important projects that we're able to get done kind of midstream that are helping to keep some of the other work under control when we get to another capital project,
which really we need to start thinking about sooner rather than later, because again, you don't need to look too far in our past with what's going on in the building still. We have needs that need to be addressed. So.
Which is a perfect segue to my next slide. So we talked a little bit about the in-house projects, the $100,000 projects, but as Dr. Franchini alluded to, we still have a lot more that needs to be done around the district. This spring, we're having our building conditions survey started, which is going to give a best idea of the systems within our building that still need to be corrected. Some of them will be fixed with the $28 million project that we have going on right now, but it's not going to be all of them. In addition to that, there's programmatic changes. We might want some of the facilities to suit our academic programs. We look at our parking lots, the paving needs to be done. So there's definite needs around the district. So in order to help finance these projects, we'd like to propose a capital reserve fund. And really what this will do, it allows the district to set aside money to offset the local share of projects going forward. So the capital reserve fund needs to be voted on approved by the voters, and to spend from the reserve, you also have to have voter approval. So the district can't establish it without voter approval, and we can't withdraw from it. The voters don't approve the annual financing that we put into it, but just the cap of what we can actually contribute. There's no budgetary impact to this or a tax increase. So if we don't have a budget line and the budget says capital reserve fund X million dollars, we use funds that may be left over at the end of the year that we would typically maybe put into a different reserve like ERS or TRS, instead we put it into the capital reserve. So the way the reserve works, and what we're proposing, is 10 million over 10 years. So this is not 10 million each year, it's 10 million in total. So if we have a 10-year reserve, and at year 5, we have 5 million in there. We can only put 5 million left until year 10. If we have 5 million in at year 5, we withdraw 2 for a project, we can't put in 7, we can still only put in 5. Your 10 million is your total contribution. Regardless of how much you take out, you can only put in 10 million in total. So it's just a way for us to meet some of the needs that we have around the district in our future capital project, but offsetting the local share of the tax impact when we do those projects. So it's, we're hoping, we have to add a proposition to the ballot in May for the voters to do that. We discussed it at facilities committee. They thought it was a good idea there, so that's why we're presenting it now to the board in terms of something to potentially add to the ballot in May.
Yeah, I think with this too, usually I jump in and interrupt Matt, but it's kind of funny to Carrie too. There's a few things that I think are really important with this slide. One is we're not necessarily going to put away $10 million. That's just a maximum, right? So it's not like we're going to ever necessarily get there, but you want to create a number that's big enough so that you can put money in over time as needed. Also really important, and Carrie just alluded to it, on the budget, on the day of the budget vote, that's going to be a separate item. So the communication part is going to be very key, because when you read it, the intuition there is a little bit to assume that we're asking for another $10 million or another $1 million a year for 10 years. That's not how it is. It is simply taking fund balance that's left over, and this just gives you another place to put it. Like we already do when we put it in the TRS reserve to help pay for the teacher retirement system, or the unemployment reserve. It's just another bucket to put it in. But the real advantage is, and we have been really, really, really hurt by this over the years because of the time we're coming out of financially, we don't have this. So when we go out for a capital project, every dollar has to come from the taxpayer, right? If we had a reserve, no different than in your own family, if you have a checking account and a savings account, if you're putting money away and you're able to take money out to pay for that roof that you have to get in your house or whatever it is, we don't have that. So when you go, and I know Michael and I spent a lot of time looking at this, when we went out for our capital project, you would see projects all around us getting voted on and improved. And you'd see that line, and every district usually had it in bold, like 100 font, with no impact to the taxpayer. That's because they had a capital reserve, right? So this is really important for us to get established, even if we put a little bit in it to get going. But to get that going is just a way of doing business, sort of like the $100,000 project. We got to kind of bite the bullet on it. We talked about that last capital project. Michael went through a lot with the whole debt service coming on and off. You want to time your project so as debt service comes off, you're adding a project on to keep that flat. That's one way to do this. We don't have projects coming off that have a lot of debt service because of all the aid we used to get from the George Washington merger. So for those who were on the board for the last capital project, you heard that over and over again. We don't have debt service coming off, and we don't have a capital reserve. You put that combination together, and it makes it really, really hard to go out to the public because you're asking them to pay for every dollar of the project. So I just kind of wanted to hit some of that.
Is this something like then we would have a reserve, like when we had the flood 2 summers ago, we would have been able to just like, all right, cover that and then, you know, immediately and then work with the insurance company and have some of it, because I know some of it came out of our pocket and some of it was covered by insurance, but would that help with this help with that type of issues too, when we have emergency building?
No, and the reason why it won't is because you have to have voter approval to take it out of the reserve.
Okay,
So if we had a big emergency like the flood, we couldn't just say, oh, let's use the capital reserve because our voters haven't given us permission to do that.
Gotcha.
So
okay,
we wouldn't be able
thank
to
you,
use in that instance.
thanks for that clarification.
You have another question?
No, I was gonna ask
Oh,
that same
okay.
question, so thank you.
Shifting gears to transportation, we don't have any recommended personnel additions here. Our staffing this year has actually been a lot better than it was last year, so we're very happy about that. Again, equipment, materials, and supplies. We've been over the past few years transitioning our fleet from diesel to gasoline. So there will be a decrease in the diesel line with an increase in gasoline, just because of the shifting of the fleet. Cost of supplies here, I was talking with Mark when we were doing the budget, and he said, you know, a set of front tires is now running him close to $1,000. So the cost of transportation materials has also gone up. And then we're also looking for a forklift safety cage. We have a second floor in the bus garage where materials are stored. So we want to get a cage that's compliant with our forklift so that the guys can go up and down, the mechanics can safely remove materials. So we just don't know how much exactly that is yet, so we're trying to identify which one is compatible with the current lift that we have. Facilities needs, at the transportation garage, our in-ground lifts are in dire need of replacement. This is not a general fund expenditure for this year. The cost of the lift replacements is too great to be part of the $100,000 capital project, so it would have to be part of the larger capital project. I had this in the presentation last year, I'm just keeping it in this year just to kind of remind the board and the public of this. But again, this is the type of thing that if we had a capital reserve, we could help kind of replace these types of materials. So it's not just our school buildings, but also our bus garage that also needs some additional work. The vehicle purchase for next year, we're looking for 3 65-passenger buses at $147,000. For some perspective, last year these buses ran us about $121,000. So the cost of the vehicles has gone up tremendously. 6 30-passenger buses at about $86,000. Last year these were about $61,000. So we're looking at high increases in terms of the vehicles that we're looking at. Net of trees, we're over $917,000. We've also started replacing some of our O&M vehicles. We'd like to continue doing that. We're proposing an enclosed utility truck and a dump body truck. And the dump body would have a sander as well for $204,000. The total cost of the vehicles is higher than we've been doing, the $1.1 million. It's really being driven by the cost of the vehicles. But I just want to remind, the board of voters that we're not increasing the budget by 1.1, we'll be financing these vehicles. So next budget cycle would be a principal and interest payment for these. So it's not a $1 million increase in the budget in order to replace these vehicles.
And these are still aidable by like 70-ish%?
Yes, yep, so we do get, well, the O&M vehicles, no, the transportation, yes. So we get the aid back on the transportation vehicles.
And has the state given us any indication on when we need to start moving our vehicles to electric vehicles?
So the last year we'll be able to purchase non-electric is 2027 with fully converted fleet to 2035. Mark and I are actually participating right now with NYSEG in a cohort for electrification of your fleet. So we're trying to gather more information and come up with a plan on how to do that. So we're looking towards it. We're not quite there. I mean, we still need the infrastructure still.
Oh, yeah, definitely. No, it's
But-
it's a heavy lift. You have infrastructure and all your vehicles, plus they need to be able to manufacture that many vehicles so the whole state can replace all their vehicles.
Yes.
So I know it's big, but I didn't know if you guys, but you are starting to plan for that.
Yeah, we're in the very early beginnings of the planning phase because we know it's something we need to do.
It's coming, yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Well, and that was kind of my question, and just, I'm sure you guys have told us this before, but the lifespan of of a, I remember Michael gave us like a grid with when they come off and how, and I don't remember that.
So we rotate out about 10 years.
Okay,
Yeah,
so these might, okay.
yeah, so we're 24, 25,
These will be
24,
hanging
so
on
it's,
alongside
yeah.
their
So it'll
electric.
probably be at end of life by 2035, these newer buses.
And again, just to provide that information, that kind of context, Jesse was definitely here for it. We did not have a bus replacement plan for a long time. So again, just like the $100,000 project or capital reserve, that was built in to get the fleet replaced on cycle, so you don't have 7 or 8 buses in 1 year. So it is important to keep the replacement plan going, just like the technology stuff that Matt talks about with our devices. It's some of that is proactive and preventative type.
Right, we did have a plan, like before I joined the board, there was a plan, and then we had several years where the public voted down the bus replacement plan, which put us off, and we had we had that issue. We were on a 5 to 7 year replacement, and now it's 10. Yep.
Well, so then, not to get ahead of ourselves, but, so it's 2020, these would count as 2024, and that's 2034. So is it like 2026 that, like, are those 3 buses that say, that are in 2026, those are the ones that we're gonna have to be like, do we, don't we? Because then they're like, we don't want them hanging, like,
Yeah.
if we can't use them in 2036, we don't want them to just, we don't wanna buy something we can't use. I'm assuming that's part of it.
Yeah, I would stick with the don't get ahead of ourselves.
That's what I said.
I think that's something
Now.
to change.
Just like,
We're planning on it, we're doing what we need to do, so we're prepared for it. I don't think we want to start adjusting our planning based on what is, I think, most people will say an arbitrary goal that was set and now being forced on.
well, I mean, I like to think that we could advocate that if you have between 1 and 3 years left in a gas vehicle, that you could get like a grandfather type
There's gonna have to be
situation.
some process in
Yeah.
place, because you
Because
have to
that-
get the
Yeah.
infrastructure built
Stop.
up.
Yeah, right on.
Yeah.
There's a lot of things that need to be related.
manufacture
Right,
So-
right, there's that too.
Thanks, Karen.
Just to, for perspective around the O&M vehicles that we want to replace. So you can see underneath the issues columns, all of what is wrong with them. A lot of it has to do with the bodies and the cabs rotting out. And the sander that needs to be replaced is over 26 years old. Here's a picture of it. You can see at the bottom, so the new dump would have a sander. Another picture, you can see the rot like on the body. So our O&M vehicles, they're really getting to the point where they're almost really not roadworthy anymore. So that's why we're looking to replace some of these vehicles. And I think the picture does a better description than the words on there. So when you see them, they're not in great shape anymore. Food service. So food service is not included in the general fund. It has its own separate fund, so the voters don't vote upon expenditures in food service, but I figured it's a good time to kind of touch base regarding this program as well. The first thing we'll do is just review how our meal service is going in terms of the quantity that we're putting out. The top part of the chart was really focusing on last year, 21-22. If you remember last year, all of our students were free regardless of their economic status. So there was no more free, reduced, and paid. And what that did is you can see our breakfast, we served over 130,000 breakfasts to our students last year, which was 210% greater than pre-pandemic. So 18-19 was the last full year that we had before COVID hit. And we served 210% more meals than we did that year. The bottom part is now comparing this year, where we're back to the more traditional classification of free, reduced, paid, to last year it was all free. And you can see we're down 43% in terms of the number of breakfasts that we served. And similar picture when we look at the lunch side of things. Last year with the free status, we were up 55% from pre-pandemic levels. If you look down from September, December, comparing this year to last year, we're down 21% in terms of the number of meals we've served. So I definitely think that reintroducing the free, reduced, paid has impacted the number of meals that we're serving to our students. Again, similar theme, increased cost of food. I think we all know we go to the grocery store, the increased prices there is the same thing that's happening to our school lunch program. So next year we're going to have to increase the line item for the cost of food. This current year we started using the BOCES program for the management of our program, and it's working out really well, and we want to continue that next year. The benefit we'll have next year is when you start a BOCES program, you get aid the following year. So this year, we're paying for the BOCES management service, but we're not getting aid back. Next year, when we pay for the service, we'll have the aid from this year coming in to offset those costs. So that BOCES aid and revenue program does help offset a little bit the lower sales that we're seeing in our program. So now that we have the 1 year under our belt, we'll get that aid back, which reduces the actual cost of the program because we have the offsetting aid. In the HR department, we started 2 years ago, about halfway through the year, we introduced an employee assistance program to our staff, and we continued it this year. It's been stimulus funded since we started the program. This is one of the programs that's an FTE program that we want to take from the stimulus money and move into the general fund for next year. When it's been funded through stimulus, it's been grant funded, in which case you can't get BOCES aid on it because that's considered double dipping. So when we move it through the general fund, it becomes BOCES aidable, but again, we'll have to wait that one full cycle until we get the BOCES aid. So next year we'll have the expense, the year after we'll have the expense, but then also the BOCES aid to help offset the cost. But this is when we're going to try to move over.
Has that been well used? I mean, we have it in our office, and I think it's
Yeah, I was just gonna jump in with that. It's something that we're tracking very closely. Kim is really on top of that. The group that we're working with has been fantastic. The usage, I think, is okay. It's typical of schools that are kind of underutilized. I think what we struggle with is it's not used tremendously when you look at the quantity of usage, but the usage that it's getting is important usage. I think it's been important for employees, and we've gotten some really good feedback on that. I think it's been important for us because it's given us some tools that we can use to help people out when we know they're struggling. So it's an interesting one because we've been so data driven. The numbers may not lend you to think it's as worthwhile as that amount, but we know that it has an effect. When it has an effect, that's pretty significant.
No, yeah.
And again, a program that we have been trying to add for a long time, but just monetarily couldn't afford it. The stimulus gave us the opportunity to try it out, so.
Well, I'm glad to hear it's being used. I don't know how the information is disseminated to the staff about the employee assistance program, but at my work, we have like daily digest. And in that daily digest, oftentimes there's talking points. What are your goals for 2024? Are you struggling financially with something? Do you have food insecurity at home? There's these questions that, contact employee assistance program to discuss this and any other items. So maybe that could kind of like cue into some of the things that they'd be willing to assist with, if you have like a newsletter kind of thing that you put out to staff and administrators, and just an idea.
Thank you.
Then lastly, in the technology office, so the wireless access points that we have throughout the district are at end of life. So we've come up with a 3-year replacement plan to transition them out. The project is going to be funded partially using E-rate, but even using E-rate funding, there is a local share of the project. So the estimated budget impact for next year will be $58,000, and if we do this over a 3-year cycle, it'll be $58,000. Probably up a little bit once things go up every year over the next 3 years in order for us to transition the whole district. But they're really at end of life and the support is ending on them. So I don't know, Matt, if you have anything further on that, or is that
Oh, you
pretty
said
much it?
well.
Okay. So that's our ask in the tech department. And that's really it for non-instructional. There's no questions.
Well, we have.
Yeah, you would.
Okay. No, I held one, for the reserve fund, so putting in, there's one vote to establish it and then establish the amount. And then each transaction, only outgoing has to be voted on, or you don't have to vote each time you add up until that cap, right? It's just when you want to take it out. And so just from a timeline, would those votes sort of be merged in with our regular annual voting, or is there something that would happen like in October or as the project came?
So I think the creation would be this May with the annual budget vote, but I think taking out the withdrawing from the capital reserve would be presented when we present a capital project vote. Sometimes those align in timing with the May vote, sometimes they're in the fall. So whenever we have the vote for the project, we would present the capital reserve at the same time. So they go hand in hand.
Standalone.
Yeah, and for the funding the reserve annually, I would do similar like I did last year when I gave the fund balance, plan to the board. I would just include it in that, so there it's transparent in terms of what we're doing. So it'd be part of the end of the year plan, and then I'll circle back in the fall with the actual how it worked out. So it would we're not be out in the open and transparent in terms of how we're funding and what we're putting in there.
Yeah, and I just would want to facilitate maximum participation. So we want as many people voting on any of that stuff as possible. So less sort of one-offs. Makes sense. So thanks, Karen.
I just have a comment. Just regarding what Sam's talking about, I just think the communication surrounding that is going to be super important. And we can't talk in school speak. It can't be fund balance because the typical voter doesn't know what that is. Or so it's got to be super general, something I'll understand, which makes, or everybody else. So it's just going to be very, very important because it's going to be an easy one to shoot down if you really don't understand what it's for and it's not impacting the voter. So agree. Just be cognizant of that.
Early and often.
And easy.
Yeah, they need
The fifth grade version.
Thank you.
No disrespect.
So we'll transition to Matt now, just to kind of remind the board. Typically, Carrie's presentation, the way we started doing this last year, she would have gone first and we would have had a couple weeks to digest it. You had about 15 seconds before Matt goes on. So that would have been the end of the first meeting, and then we would have come back the next meeting, which was today's, to do the instructional side. So in some ways good, I guess, because you're getting it back to back and you can see it in context of each other, but it doesn't give you a chance to digest a little bit. So
These slides are all available to us, correct?
they're all in the portal.
Yeah.
Can I also just say, the way that you presented, having it the same format from last year made it really easy to clue into what you were saying, right from the get-go. So do it that way next year.
Well, with that segue, I changed my presentation from last year. So I'll be presenting the budget requests on the instructional side. I'm solely focusing on the FTE and stipend positions. These were meetings with every building principal as well as directors. This is just on the staffing side. They had some small supply requests, things like that. So this will strictly be really the wish list. These are hopefully presented without commentary and just really a description of the request and the position. I'm assuming Dr. Franchini will jump in at various points to provide commentary, but I will try to do that without.
Only when asked.
Sure. So we will start at the high school. Some of these are repeats from last year. The first bullet item you might remember from last year, which is a business teacher at the high school. We have not had a business department in our high school since the early teens, I guess, was when we had to eliminate some positions. We've been unable to bring that back, and as a result, our students have no access to any business-related courses. Obviously, it would probably be a very popular thing. It also ties a lot in with our Every Student Every Day plan and some of the work we've done around business relationships, internships, and so on. Heath is also very interested in having a career exploration center in the high school, and this person would be tied in with that as well. So a position that would provide a lot of value for the high school. In addition, we're looking at a peer tutoring coordinator. This would be a part-time stipend position. We have a lot of students that have needs throughout the day, or have intervention needs that typically we'd like to address during the day. Our intervention can only be offered at certain times, depending on when teachers have availability in their schedules, and it has to line up with that student also having time in their schedule during the day. If those things don't work out, that student doesn't get the support. So what's being proposed is to have an after-school program that would tie in the National Honor Society providing peer tutoring and have them work with those students that could use that second level of intervention support beyond the classroom teacher. This would be an individual that would help to coordinate those efforts between the student, National Honor Society, and the classroom teacher. At the middle school, the first request is a CT teacher. Quite honestly, this could be a 1.0, it could be shared with the high school, it could be an additional assignment for a middle school teacher, but the need is there. Rob has talked about students, certain students really not having that niche to find in the middle school. It's really the kids that would ultimately become our CTE students in the high school, but aren't even aware that it exists. He brought up about a dozen kids this past fall to view the heavy machinery program out for a parking lot. And those kids just gravitated to it. They were climbing up on the trucks and asking all kinds of questions. He wants to have that exposure opportunity at the middle school and really get those kids excited about what's to come in the high school. So he'd be looking at some aspect of a position to support that.
I think with that one, Matt, too, is something that we've looked at a long time, not only just at Algonquin, but in middle schools in general. The curriculum down there is so mandated and required, right? You don't get to the elective portion really until you get to high school. And even then, it's in 11th and 12th grade with our CTE programs. The concern or the issue is how do you connect middle school kids who are maybe not as connected as you want them to be, right? They don't engage in the game of school like some other kids do. That CTE program is really that. So it's the hook to kind of get them in and keep them going, to keep them engaged, to get them up to the high school, and then from the high school, get them into those CTE programs. So it would be a nice addition to do something like this, and add to Algonquin's program, which they already have a good number of electives, especially for a middle school, but it would certainly add to those options to engage kids who are sometimes otherwise not engaged.
Yeah, it's a good point. Otherwise we wait till the junior year and hope that they get there to engage in the program. So this gives them a little bit of a jump start. Through the middle school and our athletic department, there's a proposal for a part-time stipend position for an athletic manager. I'm going to steal Jim's story so he doesn't have to tell it. But if you think about what we see with our own kids' sports, whether it be a travel sport or something outside of school, typically you'll see even as little as Little League, there's 3 or 4 coaches, there's a league director, there's a director of umpiring. There's a lot of adults at the field should things happen. When you watch a modified contest, it's typically the coach, and that's it, that's there. And that coach is not only responsible for the usually 17, 18 kids on a team, but any problems with parents, any problems with officials not showing up, any problems with the other team, buses, they're taking it all on. Mark is obviously spending a lot of time at the high school contest, difficult to get between the 2 buildings. This would allow us to have an adult at the events at the middle school for each season. And we anticipate this would look a little bit like a stipend after-school position where it could be a teacher taking on that role, and they would just be available for the contests that take place at our home events at the middle school.
And I think that's summed up well. For those who were paying attention in the news, there was literally just someone who was killed at a fight in a game in Vermont. It was a modified event. Crowd got out of control before the Vermont State Police, if I remember correctly, were able to respond. From my understanding, the entire event was over. So the fight already happened, and it literally led to someone, most extreme example. It is just something that makes us nervous. If you go to a middle school event, there is no adult down there other than the coach. And there's a lot of parental issues out there right now at these events, and having an extra set of eyes and someone who can kind of manage and de-escalate and call services would be something that might be more of an insurance policy, if nothing else, and more of a good thing to have proactively. So it's just something that we were talking about. I know Mark has talked about it. At this point, if you look at the other suburban schools, the suburban council, they have a full-time assistant athletic director. This would be nothing like that, or they have some form of that. They use different titles and different responsibilities. We're not looking, in this case, Mark's ask is not a full-time position as an assistant. It's like Matt kind of mentioned, it's a person who's maybe on duty at the middle school from 2:30 to 5:30 during the 3 seasons or something like that.
The next position is the first of what you'll see of the ones that I mentioned earlier. These are currently being funded by stimulus funds. There is no plan to have them be funded next year with stimulus. So the decision would be to bring the position back into the local budget or eliminate the position. The first one is a social studies teacher at Algonquin. This is a position that has allowed us to do a few things. It's allowed us to create a global issues elective course. It's probably the most heavily subscribed elective that our 8th grade students can take at the middle school, deals with current events. In addition, the person in this role has served a number of other functions for the building. They've served as an instructional technology specialist. So Algonquin was our first school to have a one-to-one, so we had a person in the building supporting the teachers and the students, and has allowed them to really take their use of technology to the next level. He's done great work working with teachers and students and doing a lot of project-based work. In addition, he does a lot for the Warrior Wellness events at the Algonquin, planning, creating materials, a lot of creativity in terms of building the building culture. So there's a lot of different pieces that go into that social studies teacher role that the building has really grown to appreciate, rely on, and it's something that they would love to see continue. Along those lines with technology, the building does have, every student does have a Chromebook. Currently, when those Chromebooks have issues, they bring them to the library. We have a librarian, we have an aide in there that are not necessarily tech support, but they tend to put that hat on when the kids come in. At the high school, we have a kind of a similar setup, but we do have another adult that is specific there for help desk and has a student-run help desk team to address the issues. So the middle school would love to do something very similar, where the kids that have broken Chromebooks could come to the library, work with this adult and a team of students to fix the Chromebooks, to have quicker turnaround so they don't have to come to the district office to our technology group there to do fixes. So that's something that Rob would love to see be brought into the building to help that turnaround, to keep kids. Quite honestly, the good news is the use of the technology has been integral to a student's education. So when they don't have that device or they have to use a loaner device, it does impact instruction. And so we want to make sure that we aren't getting in the way of good teaching and learning. Sliding to the K-5 level, the first request, again, this is one that we saw last year as well, is the need for a social worker. We do not currently have a social worker at the elementary level, and we do have counselors and psychologists. Social worker provides a different level of support. We talked about it last week. It's really that wraparound service. They have the knowledge to know what services are out there to support kids and their families. A lot of family contact, a lot of things beyond just the student to help them be successful in school. Really critical to have a position like this. It's one we did have in the past that was cut, as Jim calls it, the bad old days, and has never made its way back. And really an important part of providing that whole child support beyond just what goes on in the classroom.
And Matt, just
Yeah.
to jump in there, you actually dug into this a little bit to look at comparable schools
Yeah.
in terms of lumping, you can speak to it, the data shows that we are a little bit underserved.
Yes, yeah. If I did a study last year, I think 6 or 7 very similar sized schools. We were only one of 2 that had no social workers at the elementary level. So certainly something that we probably need to address at some point, if hopefully this year, if not in the very near future, because it is a critical piece for supporting our kids. AIS is something, again, we've talked about this in the past. There was positions that we lost or were going to lose prior to stimulus funding. We were at 9 AIS teachers in February of 2020 with a budget plan to cut that down to 6. We got the stimulus money in March of 2020 and we're able to reinstate back to 9. We've been able to keep those going through stimulus funding, but as that stimulus funding comes to a close, we are starting to have to reduce that. The plan right now through attrition is to reduce 2 AIS teachers for next year. We're trying to potentially hold on to the 7th one. All right, the 6 are still in the budget, but there is one that is not currently funded for stimulus for next year, but we would love to be able to continue that. The AIS program has grown leaps and bounds in the last few years. The buildings have done an amazing job of really focusing on the academic skills that our students need to be successful readers. We know that's the most critical foundational skill they can have. I've been able to sit in on what they call the data meetings, which is where they look at the screening data that our students receive 3 times a year. They get right down to the skill set of what skills students are struggling with. They group the kids together. They work with them anywhere from 2 to 5 days a week, and we're seeing improvement because of it. So kind of hard to swallow that we would take a hit from a budget standpoint. But we do recognize that it was where we were headed a few years ago, and we're kind of back to that same spot right
I think it's one of the areas too, when you talk about, hard to talk about education in terms of a return on investment type of model. But when you look at those positions and the return on the investment we've had to the stimulus money, we have solid data to prove that kids are doing better, and our most kids at the earliest stages are reading better and performing better as a result of the AFAS model that's been built and implemented. So certainly something we would like to keep in a perfect world at those numbers of 9. But
The next one I'll focus on are positions that cover multiple levels. The first one is a strings teacher, again, another one that we presented last year. This has been critical for trying to get us back to levels that we were at, again, back before the battle days. We took a hit in that department. I think Jim alluded to it with another department earlier tonight. Similar type of thing. We've never really been able to get back to that level. Specific, we want to focus on strings because currently our wonderful music teachers do a great job of supporting strings. They support instrumental, they support choral. Yet none of those teachers are actually trained as a strings, I'm saying this right, Sarah? Trained as a strings teacher. And I mean, I'll equate it somewhat roughly to having, teachers can teach science, but they might know biology better. They might know earth science, and they might know physics. It's a similar type of thing. Can they do it? Yes. Are they doing it justice? Maybe not as much as we would like. And I guess along those lines is we want to really, we're seeing what's happening on our instrumental side. Our growth has been really great. Consequently, we have more kids taking band, but that music teacher is having to do band and orchestra. So as a result, those band lessons are getting bigger and bigger, the number of kids that they're working with, which has impacts. It's harder to get that individual attention. And so by having a dedicated strings teacher, it allows them to just focus on our orchestra students, and the instrumental teacher can just focus on our band students and giving lessons to those and doing the performance groups. The other multi-level position is our middle school, high school PE teacher. This is another one that was funded through stimulus this year. This would be a position that it would get split between the middle school and high school. Currently, we have, oh no, we didn't. We have a full-time in the PE position at the high school, but that person would end up getting split for next year. The concern, I guess, with not having this position really comes down to group sizes. If you've ever been in a PE class, if you remember your own PE classes, groups can get very large. Having less adults in the space certainly makes it a safety concern for the teachers, for the buildings. In addition, it's about being able to give more individualized programs. Our PE offerings are tremendous. The students are able to pick the area that they're interested in and really specialize in a kind of an elective within PE and choose a pathway. By having less staff, it's going to obviously give us less of a chance to give that diverse offering. So I'll have more kids doing the same things. And, as we all know, everyone has a different PE experience from their childhood. And I think what our PE staff has done is really tried to give that individualized availability to our students to let them pick something they're interested in and hopefully be successful in life with.
And I think, again, something we've been trying to do is use data to make these decisions. So whether you're talking about enrollment in the strings program, or you're talking about square footage for the custodians, or the AIS data impact, we know from doing comparison data that our PE staff has larger group sizes and class sizes than any of our counterparts by a significant number. So in many ways, a recurring theme throughout all of the programs, right? And it's enrollment driven, it's decreases in electives, it's opportunities for kids, and this is another example on these 2 bullets here.
All this is a prelude to the big one, special education, which has really captured our attention over the past month. A lot of what you see up here are obviously mandated through IEPs to be provided for students. And they come at a fairly significant cost when you look at the number of positions that this slide represents. As you remember, last year we did start a 612 program at Post-and-Kill, and we are still in the first year of implementing that. It's been a lot of growing pains as we've gotten adjusted to the program, and unfortunately, or I guess fortunately in some regards, we do potentially see the need for a second one in Post-and-Kill because of the kids that are coming in. The good news, as you remember from last year, the reason we wanted to do this was it's nice to be able to keep the kids here and not have to outplace them, which is, if we did not have a 612 program, is where we would be headed. It does save money. Those students to be outplaced does come at a cost, so having the program in-house certainly helps as well. But it does provide, kind of lead to a pretty decent strain on the building and the teachers. It's our most challenging population of students, but we're really, we've seen tremendous growth with them. We've been very proud of what we've been able to do, but there's still work to be done. So we are still kind of evaluating our ability to keep that program going here, and then what it would look like if we had a second classroom on there. Along those lines, we also had a very large, or will have a very large incoming kindergarten classroom that will have needs that would require a 1201 classroom, which are, some of them are more serious physical needs and learning needs from our students. So I'll give you kind of numbers to think about. Typically, for our kindergarten class to come in classified for any kind of service, not just 612 or 1211s, but speech services, anywhere from 10 to 12 students in a kindergarten. This year, we're in the high 30s. So the needs of our incoming students is far higher than we've seen. And obviously, we need to respond to those needs. And that's what's driving what you're seeing on this list. So we have a lot more students than we normally see requiring 1211s. We have 2 1201 classrooms at West Sand Lake. We'd be looking to add a 3rd classroom there. When you add more special ed students, then the services that go along with it are needed. So that represents the next 2 bullets. We'd be looking at adding a certified occupational therapist and a speech teacher to provide those related services that our special ed students need. Those classrooms also require teaching assistants and or teaching aides. That represents the next 3 bullets. And then the last bullet at Algonquin, we're looking for teaching assistants simply because the demand is there. The number of students that we had go from our elementary to the middle school this year was higher than normal. They've had a very challenging time trying to manage the students in the 3 grades and really need another set of hands. The request initially was looking like it might be a teacher. We kind of discussed it. We think a teaching assistant will help support some of those needs at that level. So again, a lot coming from special ed on our wish list, and certainly presents some challenges for us as a district.
And with this, really important, I think, to note that regardless, we're going to have to pay for this one way or another because these are mandated services. So the students need to be serviced. We either need to do it internally, which is going to be a cost you can see from FTE increases, or you're outplacing students, which also comes at a cost and is a higher cost depending on the needs and the number of kids. So unlike the other slides where those things are not necessarily required, this slide is really things that we have to do to some degree.
So it gets to kind of the where do we go next thing. I guess before I get into the bullet points, I'll say that there's probably nothing that you saw on the list that you could say, yeah, we should do, right? Everything that we heard from the principals and directors, we felt really strongly like that this is something we should be doing as a district, which makes these next steps really challenging because you can make a case for everything that we just presented. We haven't prioritized, we haven't said no, we've just simply listened and noted what the requests were. Where we'll head next is look for areas for attrition based on retirements, maybe other spots that we don't have to replace that might open up spots for things that we could add. We look at bringing that staff funded by stimulus back in the general budget, as I mentioned in my prior presentation and earlier in this one. We are looking to bring some people back to get them out of stimulus because we've got one more year. We'll replace staff where necessary. We'll add new positions where appropriate and obviously reduce staff if needed. If it gets to a point where we have to go the other way and we can't add but reduce them, we'll have those difficult decisions to make and discussions to have. Any questions?
And I think before you leave that slide, Matt, something we've been talking about, this is my 6th year back, we've talked about attrition every year. The bad news is there's not a lot left, right? We have made cuts. It's something we've been very clear about and transparent about, that where we have the ability to cut, we will cut, because that's where we get the true savings, right? When we have breakage, when someone retires and someone replaces them, we save money. But because you're carrying the health insurance, it's not the gap that you've been. We get the true savings out of attrition, and we've done that a lot over the years. There's just not a lot left before you start getting into core programs, electives, opportunities, those type of things. So I don't want you to leave tonight thinking that attrition is really going to solve any of our problems. It's just not really in the cards. And I think the second point or first point that Matt brought up in the slide, we have started a process of asking the supervisors and the principals, what is it that you want, right? Kind of a no judgment type of thing. And we've gotten this list. If you show that list to, I would dare say, any district, there's nothing on the list that is fluff or extravagant. It's just not how this district has operated for a long time. I know that as a principal here, like, you don't ask for things. Dennis could speak to it more clearly than any of us. People are only asking for things that they feel that there's a true need for, that will benefit kids directly. There's nothing on that list is crazy, pie in the sky, wishful thinking. It is stuff that in many cases, what I kept going back to, it's areas where we know our counterparts, and we're not talking initially about the big suburbans, we're talking about people who fit the same demographic profile, same socioeconomic profile, have these things, right? So it's not like we'd be adding to get back to where they are, or we're adding a custodian to get back to 30,000 square feet. So not to set it up too much, but it's very much things that we would believe in a perfect world would add. But we know there's limitations.
So I have a question and a comment. The question is, your CTE teacher at the middle school, do you have the facilities in place, tools, whatever they're gonna need as well
Yeah.
to support that?
Yeah, we have existing classrooms that they would just, through scheduling, be able to utilize same spaces for.
Okay. And then regarding the business teacher, I just have a couple comments. So I've been an enormous advocate of business in the high school, and I'll sum it up in just 30 seconds, hopefully. So north of, we do a fantastic job as a school system of creating and preparing kids that will be college and career ready, right? And I'll do a fantastic job of college ready. Career ready, CTE stuff, things like that, we do a really good job of that. But north of 20% of our kids won't be going to college. A lot of them are going to stay around and they're going to go into the trades. They're going to be plumbers, electricians, tree guys, tree girls, whatever. And because of a lack of business skills, they will struggle to start out and become their own plumbing business and their own tree surgery business, things like that. So business, I don't want you to think of business as we're going to send people to Madison Avenue. It's mostly helping students that will go into the trades someday have a chance to do better than just working for somebody else.
Just to piggyback off of that, I couldn't possibly agree with you more. Just in my day-to-day business, I see individuals who are very talented in their trades trying to start their own businesses and struggling and failing because they don't have those skills. So 100% agree with Adam on that.
Thank you.
And just for the board to,
Oh, yeah, go ahead. I'm sorry. Just one thing that's kind of like back here, and find, and, I look at these presentations and I see, like you say, there's no fluff. These are all really valuable programs, but how do you respond when the public says to us, why are we adding positions when we're losing kids, for the population of the district is going down? How do we respond? What is your response to that? Like, I'm not able to enunciate the reasoning behind it when we say that our population is going down, but we're adding positions and we're adding teachers.
it's a great question, and it's something that we've talked about in our presentations. We have tried to increase our footprint, and that's the nutrition piece. So we have said publicly that as our footprint decreases, our enrollment decreases, we need to correspondingly do that with our staff. We do run into some issues with that though, right? So for example, the elementaries are 3 sections deep, right? Across the board, every grade, every building. We are actually going to be proposing to reduce a section at one of our buildings. That's all enrollment driven. If you really wanted to address that issue, you'd want to get rid of the community school model. And you'd make, Miller Hill kindergarten, first grade, Poston Hill 2, 3, and West Henley 4, 5. Then you would see the benefits of being able to take the number of kids divided by the number of teachers. I don't think anyone would be a proponent of getting rid of our community schools, right? People feel very strongly about that. There's history, there's 100 reasons to not do it. But if you're talking from a purely financial point of view and you want to decrease your FTE, that's how you would do it. We're kind of limited there because of that. If you go through the other parts of this, what we have tried to do is expand opportunities for kids where you get to see some of the electives. I don't know if that's really adding to our FTE. Our teachers by contract are working full schedules. We don't have schedules where teachers are not being fully utilized. So we're offering electives with the confines of a schedule. We're not building in extra time for teachers who are not working. So that's not the issue. I think part of it comes down to increased needs, right? So like, for example, having 9 AIS teachers, I don't think we would have had that historically if you go back in time. So part of it is meeting needs. If you look at the need for a social worker, if you look at the need for counselors, those type of support services get built into the budget. So as needs are increasing, our special ed costs are increasing. And then you just have the inflationary issues like Carrie talked about that we're trying to be retirement system increases, health increases, collectively bargained salary increases, all those things go into a budget that gets bigger. And then, and this is where we're going to kind of spill into Carrie's next presentation, we have a funding issue, right? And our state aid is not rising to the level of other places. And you're going to see that, I didn't want to go too into that tonight because that's the next presentation. Our state aid is not really keeping up with other districts. And that's through the formula that's out there. It's not our business, it's what we get. But you look at our budget and it's just lower than other places. So we are trying to do more with less, giving all this back. But it's a great question, and it's something we've been very cognizant of and have tried to, as I said, reduce where we can.
I did hit on, because it was within a couple of weeks ago that was asked of me, and I did hit on some of those points where we've used attrition where possible, absolutely, and, rising costs of heating, things we have no control over, ERS, TRS, health insurance, things that we can't control. But what I would hope is that in your budget letter, that even just addressing that you're aware that there is a decrease in enrollment, like why are costs going up when there's a decrease in enrollment? And then, like a little blurb similar to why it's so important to explain why we need a capital reserve fund without saying, you don't want to say so much that you confuse people, but you want them to understand that this is not going to have an impact on your taxes and very to the point, something, address that in the budget newsletter, because I think it is in the minds of our community and our taxpayers. If our enrollment keeps decreasing, why are our costs going up? Just something to explain these generalities, like you said, it's not, you want your community schools, but there are so many costs that are just beyond our control. And then programmatically, we want to be able to offer things like a strengths teacher and a business teacher and those electives that enrich many students. So I just think that it's come up, it's been asked of me, so I know that it's out there, and I think it's just something that should be addressed. Thank you.
I think the other part of that as it relates to coming into this budget, and Jim, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, but the added needs for like the AIS and the extra help, those were being funded with the stimulus funds. Just because the federal government decided that we're done doesn't necessarily mean that our students are fully through the process and that extra help is still needed. So from a perspective of we have no choice at this point because the funding is going away, we have to add those positions because our kids still need the extra help. They're not done needing it just because the government decided they should be. And that's a larger, more broad issue that needs to be addressed, to Jim's point, related to the funding models, that you send emails, I would leave messages with our officials and you get no responses. So feel free to call the elected officials and tell them they need to restructure our funding. That's something else that we could do collectively as a community, is hold our higher elected officials to account.
And to that point, it'd be helpful to have talking points when we do call out there, so everybody's sending the same message. Here's where we are as a district, as you said, with like the funding, and being left behind, and that's not okay. I mean, I get everybody's on a tight budget, but when other schools are increasing and we're not, like, how can we convey that succinctly? And if we have talking points that we can use when we are calling, and then maybe, reach out to some community groups who would also be willing to make phone calls.
Well, and just one more point, because I want to make sure that everyone is aware, if you really drill down district by district to districts that get quite a bit more funding than we do and use far less of that funding to student programming than we do. Our district does an amazing job pouring as much funding as possible into the student development. And I think that should be applauded, because there's a lot of districts getting a ton of money and I don't know where they're spending it because it's not on student development.
All right, well, we're gonna, just to do, kind of.
Just to give you more homework, but.
Yeah, I'm just kidding.
But no, it would be super
I
helpful.
wrote down Carrie, Matt, Kim. So,
Okay.
um,
But just as to Megan's point, like, we have that, every district's supposed to have that pie chart with this is how much you spend administrative, this is whatever. If we do that for our district versus other districts, then that really speaks to the point that we're trying to make, that we're underfunded when all these other districts are rising and we're staying at this level and they're increasing much faster. It helps us to convey that, and it helps it to convey the community so that the community is more interested in advocating for us too.
Absolutely.
So those types of numbers and information would be helpful to have as talking points, and then maybe we can use our community resources groups to do that. And then we all belong to different organizations too, to like help with that. Just thought, I think you guys did a great job presenting. Thank you, and thanks for kind of bringing it back to what is important to us, and let's do right by our students. So
Before you leave that, Bessie, just to set up the stage for where we're headed. So this was really the first two presentations.
Right.
The next one will be Carrie coming back with the state aid, financial type stuff, cap, all the nuts and bolts of the numbers. Then I'll come back with next meeting after that will be my superintendent's budget recommendations to the board for your adoption. Then we have one built in for discussion, and then it's budget adoption. So it moves pretty quickly from here. So we get that information out to the public as soon as we can.
great, thank you. Does anybody have any other questions, comments? All right, much more to come. All right, that brings us to item number 10, our resolutions, and we will just go through those. I would ask for a motion to approve the agreement between the Averill Park Central School District and Anna Crane to waive the rights of tenure. Adam, seconded by Ann. Discussion? All those in favor? Passes unanimously, thank you. A motion to approve the memorandum of agreement between APTA and the district regarding unit work. Megan, seconded by Adam. Discussion? Bring it to a vote. All those in favor? Passes unanimously. Thank you. A motion to approve the agreement between the district and Dr. Cosgrove regarding the performance of students' psychoeducational service for the attached agreement. Megan, seconded by Ann. Discussion? All those in favor? Passes unanimously. A motion to approve the memorandum of agreement between the Averill Park Central School District and the Averill Park Administrators Association dated January 13th, 2023, establishing a new collective bargaining agreement for the period of July 1st, 2023 through June 30th, 2026. Megan, and Jackie, seconded by Jackie. Discussion? Thank you. Thank you, Dennis. That was directed to you. You were looking down, I just said thank you for having this process go smoothly. Any other discussion? All those in favor? Thank you, passes unanimously. A motion to approve the memorandum of agreement between the Averill Park Central School District and the non-instructional supervisors, managerial confidential personnel, and the district's treasurer regarding the holiday schedule. Adam, seconded by Ann. Discussion? Okay, all those in favor? Passes unanimously. The last one would be a motion to approve the memorandum of understanding by and between the Averill Park Central School District and Jubilee Daycare. Jackie, seconded by Megan. Discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor? Passes unanimously. Thank you. That brings us to our discussion item, the volunteer firefighters and ambulance tax exemption. And I think, I know the board has, you brought this to our attention that this is something that we have the ability to address. I know we are still trying to get information. Is Carrie have some, or somebody have some information that you want to kind of start off our discussion?
Yeah, I think Carrie's gonna kind of talk through what she's been doing on this. It's obviously very new, and we're, as you said, gathering the information now. We want to make sure we brought to the board and public to know that we're working on it, kind of some of the steps that we've taken and where we're at. Carrie has experience with this, with the veterans exemption, so she's kind of been through this a little bit, talk us through the process and past and future.
Yeah, so for those of you who are here on the board when we did the veterans exemption, the firefighter is a little bit different in terms of the veterans exemption already existed prior to it being for us having to adjust it. So we had data regarding how many veterans were getting the exemption, so we could do some easy calculations. The firefighters exemption, we don't have data yet on how many firefighters this could impact. So we're trying to do what we'd like to present to the board in a public hearing is like, here's the exemption, but here's the potential tax rate impact for taxpayers if this went through. So in order to try to gather that, I reached out to FASNY, which is the Firefighters Association of New York. I reached out to them to see if they could help me. They put me in touch with their attorney, who's giving me contacts of local people to try to reach out to help gather that information. In addition, the county put something out about passing it as well. So I reached out to the County Office of Real Property Services to see if they had information they could give me. So we're trying to come up with the information just to give, it's not going to be firm numbers because until the paperwork is filled out, we don't know. You have so many firefighters and EMS workers that are going to be in each firehouse. If do you rent, do you own? So it's going to be very, we'll have rough numbers, they'll never be exact, but at least be, closer to something, just to give the board an idea of what the impact would be. Because the school itself, it's not going to change the levy, it's just going to change how the taxes are divided up, right? So that's what we're trying to gather some information just to give an idea of what the impact would be. So that's where we're at.
I have a couple questions. This is pertaining only to volunteer, correct? So we wouldn't have to give an exemption if we adopt this to like a paid Troy City firefighter that lives in our district.
No,
Okay, it's just for volunteers.
Yep.
I do have a question. So, first of all, I appreciate the volunteers very much. I was an EMT for about 10 years, and it's a really awesome thing that everybody does out here, and we don't have paid services, and the way they respond is just phenomenal. But I do have a question regarding volunteers. So sometimes you have active volunteers and you have people just sit on your roster. So how does that get determined? Who gets a tax exemption? Is it everybody that's on the roster, or is it somebody that does a certain amount of hours per year, or how is that determined?
I don't know the specifics of that. There is an application, once it's adopted by a jurisdiction, there's an application process that the volunteers have to submit in order to get the exemption. So I'm assuming through that process, there's some kind of vetting that happens in terms of who's eligible or who's not. But I don't know if there's a requirement of minimum service hours. I didn't see anything on that, but I don't know. I can look into that.
Yeah, because that would be something we would want to consider, like, would people just join to receive the exemption, but not really participate.
Yeah, because if they're gonna just join for the exemption, it doesn't really benefit our services or us.
And that would be the
We
intent.
want them to actually do the work to help them help everybody here.
According to
And you guys know how hard it is to get
According-
volunteers.
Have more information.
Preach, right?
According to Jeff's research on this, he said, school district that chooses to adopt such a tax exemption resolution must establish a certification procedure and a minimum service requirement between 2 and 5 years for eligibility. So I think we decide, but we have a range.
That's
I also have a question, but also with all this discussion, we love the volunteers, of course. I'm sure everybody up here has a story on how you've helped us, and nothing but great appreciation for what you do. At the same time, what you're asking us is to say, okay, you're gonna pay a little less in taxes and everybody else is gonna pay a little more in taxes. And it's probably fair, but we need to know how much we're talking about, so that's why we wanna put some research into it. So it makes sense. My question is, besides figuring out what those rough numbers are and what the ratio might be, based upon your experience, Carrie, with the veterans, what's sort of the additional level of effort for the district to administer a program like this? Are we hiring someone else to do this? Is it like an hour a month? What are we talking about?
So the piece I still haven't figured out yet, because we collect our home taxes in-house here, so I don't know if the certification would be done through us or it would be done at the local assessor's office, because the assessors are the ones who are ultimately change the roles. So that I don't know. If it's done at the assessor's office, less work for the school district, but since we're the tax collector for all of our different towns, I don't know if we're gonna have a piece of that process yet. I don't know the answer to that yet.
Okay.
That would be sort of lumped into the certification process
Right,
too, like
exactly.
whether that would be on us.
On
or
us,
the
Jeff's
assessors.
analysis had a lot of administration sort of
Yeah.
implied, and
Oh,
that's
yeah.
why
Yeah,
I'm
no,
asking.
that's a good question.
Right, so we don't ultimately change the tax rules, so that's what I don't know is if we do the certification and pass it on to the assessors. But if the county is gonna pass this after their public hearing, they're gonna have some mechanism already in place, so I don't know if it's gonna be shifted to the assessor's office, I just don't know.
Jackie actually had a good question. Is this just related to school taxes or is it related to all local
Town
taxes, town taxes too?
Yep, so it can be stacked essentially, so they could qualify for school, for town, for county, the exemption can be for each level of taxes.
We're not voting on that, like, we're only
We're
voting.
just
on
schools.
schools.
Just
So,
schools,
right,
yeah.
so if the town of Post and Hill
That's up to them.
votes it down, which then we voted it up, then there would be some
Yeah.
easing, but not full easing, so there's a lot of these. My other question was just, do we have, I mean, and I recognize I'm asking this and you don't have all the information. Are we looking at a timeline that, like, September rolls around and that this would be implemented by, like, this would impact the September levy, or it can't happen when the budget, like, what's the timeline where it's tied to the budget vote versus the levy? Do we have a sense?
Well, March 1st is when the tax assessments are due, so that's really the first timeline. We're hoping, the thought is, and there's been nothing out about this, but that since it was just passed in December and not a lot of time has been put in for local municipalities to pass this, that maybe there'll be an extension for just this exemption in order to get onto the tax rules for school taxes. But it's very likely that we won't make for September and it'll be in for next year.
It's, especially if we're not they're not prepared to roll out the resources or even the information that we need to be able to make an informed decision. Right, if you're calling offices that are telling you to call other people, like they don't have their information together to give to you so you can provide to us to make a decision. Or, based on order of magnitude and level of effort, so that's very difficult to do in 3 months if they don't have the information together to be able to provide us good information. That's my, it's,
Yeah, no,
it's a lot to
I agree,
consider.
that's, yeah, I mean, I just wanna say like, the spirit of what this is going after, I was an EMT, I've had first responder training as well, and it's no joke. And, you know, we'd be lost without it, no doubt. And so, from conceptually, like, I think this is a fantastic idea, and I'd like to just sort of just see progress, and if the timeline works, if it's prioritized and the timeline works, then we'll kind of keep it at the forefront. I don't think like anybody here is, it's not gonna get sort of mothballed, and so hopefully we'll get information in a timely way.
We definitely need more information. I mean, that's like, sounds like that sort of consensus. We need more information to be able to make an informed decision on the impact.
Which carries.
Yeah, which is scary. I mean,
We'll keep
right.
working on it, yeah.
No, obviously, we're working on it. I'm not saying that. It's just, that's my frustration with the state. They say these things,
Oh,
and then they leave it up to the local, but they don't provide us the information or the resources that we need to be able to make these decisions. And that's, so my frustration is not with this, it's just with the process, the way the state will see things out. So, anyway. But, yeah, more information. Megan, did you have something else to add?
I was just gonna say, that I have very personal experience with our local ambulance, that I am forever eternally grateful to them and support the relief proposed. But I'm excessively tired of this state making blanket statements and dumping responsibilities on, instead of taking, if they want these things, they need to participate, appropriately.
Agreed. Certainly. We definitely all appreciate all the volunteers in every aspect of our community. Great. So,
yes, circle back.
yeah, we're gonna, we just, I guess, what, and we had some good questions asked. I know Carrie's working on trying to find the right person to try and get some information. Thank you for your due diligence on that. I know it's gotta be extremely frustrating to make a call to just say, oh, try this person, to make another call. So that's gotta be aggravating. So thank you for that. And we did have some good questions, and, once we can put it back on the agenda to discuss once you have some more information to provide us. I think that would be fair. And I know it's also budget season, so we also need to be cognizant of your bandwidth. So we certainly are, I think. And if we're not gonna make the March 1st deadline for this year, which it sounds like, because we only have less than, about 3 weeks to do that. So I think we have time to really pull this together once you have a little bit more bandwidth after the budget cycle. But we will continue, it's not gonna be one fault. So,
Yeah, absolutely,
Yeah,
yeah. As front burners.
yes. Any other thoughts or questions on that?
Only that if our local representatives have additional information that may help, help our officials, if you have some of that information, if you could share it, because the state has a habit of stonewalling. So
I'll speak out to it, but I mean, we're still seeing a lot of the same answers that you guys are. And we're working with FASD, we're working with the Association of Fire Districts from New York State, amongst others to get out of that. I put out an email to our attorney today. I'm board of fire commissioner. I'm chairman of the board of fire commissioners for Rainbow Park Stanley Fire District. And 18-year member of the Rainbow Park Fire Department, the Postal Fire Company, and well tonight. So, yeah, we're in the same boat. We're more than happy to participate, try to help to connect, and just try to share information.
Yeah, you'd be willing to share a roster and some numbers,
Absolutely.
so we could get an idea of the magnitude.
Yeah, my understanding is you guys would adopt a resolution, we would then give you a certified roster. The exact timing of that is to be determined, obviously school, which is town county, or different times a year. You could have different members achieving two-year status, 3-year or 5-year status at different times of year. You have to do different rosters.
Yeah, there's a lot of moving parts on your end too.
Yeah, it would help us to be able to adopt or no, to make a decision if we had some of that information on the front end, then we can, discuss that. So
Right.
whatever you can share with
You
me.
can anonymize it, we're just interested in like numbers by tenure, I think.
Sure, I
Yeah.
believe we have somebody working on that, somebody at the county level that's happens to be a member of our department, also in the emergency services at the county level. Is already working on that, and I know another commissioner on our board looking at it with him, so I know that he's reached out to several different fire insurance companies that are within, the school district.
Great.
So a lot of different.
Yeah, there's 9 towns.
Yeah.
So we're trying to get a solid number on how many districts we're talking, how many, volunteer analysts we're talking, what the numbers are. I believe that terminology is enrolled member, and it was left intentionally vague, somewhat subject to the discretion of each district or company to decide what's fair. And obviously, we have our own, decision point there. We don't want to just give it to anybody. We don't want, card carrying members. We're not interested in that either. We put in a lot of effort. People that put in the effort want to make sure that they get benefit, that people that deserve to get benefit, not just.
That's why.
Right.
Yeah,
So it's, I wouldn't anticipate, but I can't speak for everybody. I don't speak for myself.
But thank you, that's valuable too, because, you're a big part of it too.
Well,
So, thank you.
I think that like getting information, and I would ask you guys to weigh in like, those with 2 years versus those with 5 years, but giving us a sense of what what the longevity is, and if there's an opinion maybe, or at least your averages of who you're working with would help steer us towards a 2-year versus a 5-year.
Yeah, every department and district is a little different. Speaking for Averill Park, we have, over 50 first line members and paramedics. Or, we had a workshop last Tuesday as a district, and we're discussing our criteria. We haven't adopted a resolution for ourselves yet, but we intend to. We have a draft on our review. The criteria for that, we're probably looking at, including paramedic support. They're not first line responders, but they're people that help us fundraise, they're people that come to company meetings, they're active on our executive committees, they're treasurers, they're presidents, other roles that benefit the company, even if they're not responding to calls. So,
It's all valuable.
You're still learning, yeah.
Yeah.
so it's probably a good majority of our membership. Generally, people have years, but again,
Sure. Well, we appreciate that feedback too, that's good to understand your perspective on it.
Sure. And the other,
your thoughts.
one of the biggest reasons we're here advocating for you, I know it was just an operating plan. There's a New York State income tax credit, $200 per firefighter, which you can take or collect. There's now this property tax exemption. You have to choose one of them. If school districts are not included, it may or may not be financially beneficial to you to choose property tax.
Yeah.
Town and county taxes, I speak for myself personally. It would be just barely beneficial for me with just town and county, assuming they adopt it as well, and fire district. If the school district comes in, that's a much bigger benefit.
Right.
That'll be threefold compared to the $200.
Is that an annual decision you have to make?
Yes, because we as individuals have to file a form with the assessor's office by legal date March 1st to be determined.
Right.
So we have a lot of people that come up on a decision point, they submit the form. If they submit the form, are they then only allowed to get property tax exemption, or can they rescind the form and then go back to the income tax credit? That's why we're pushing for the adoption, because the sooner we know whether it's adopted, the sooner we can actually leverage the benefit
Mhm.
for our membership and use it as recruitment retention tool. So,
But for this tax year, if we don't adopt it, then you can opt in next tax year, if we do adopt it by then. I'm just trying to understand the bigger picture and the design line from that perspective, that you have a choice every year to go one way or another.
I believe so, yes. I don't know what I know you would have to fill out the form and submit it. I don't know how you then take it off. You probably have to contact the assessor and say, It can only have that phone up. My understanding is it's a one-time solution. Once you apply for it, it stays there. Because it also has to be firefighters that reside within the district that are serving. We have to have a few long-term members that reside just outside of the district. So even our school district.
So they have to be the fire district and the fire district.
So there's there's some nuances there.
Interesting. That I was not aware of. That's it. All right. Yep, just more to consider. More moving parts.
Yeah. Choice to do that.
Just a-
We have also some members that are not part of the Averill Park school system, but are part of the town of Poston Kill. And
Right, so their school district, should they adopt, should be, yeah.
Oh, yeah, I was gonna
Yeah.
say.
So there's a lot of overlap. That's part of what the district wants. The fire districts support. Most goes on fire districts in town. We want to have.
Sound, yeah.
The fire districts, the fire companies, you're dealing with two different entities, like you're saying, Supposed to kill as a fire company, which is the town, what is somebody else there? The park is a fire district.
Just to make it perfectly clear. Perfect. Well, and I just wanted to say, this is a little bit atypical. We typically don't ask members of the audience to participate, but you guys
I will follow.
certainly came with some, a little bit more, maybe even more information that we have been able to ascertain at this point. So we appreciate that, and I know we kind of broke format for it, and I apologize for that, but this is helpful. So more to come.
If we could just get his contact information.
Yeah,
Before you leave,
Work together.
it'd be helpful to, yeah, thank you.
And if you want to go now, you can write it down and give it to Linda and do, we're okay with that, although we are almost done, but
And thank you for being here.
yes.
Yes.
Yeah.
It's a long meeting to sit through.
Thank
Yeah.
you. Well, hopefully you learn some things about our budget and our process too.
School system.
All right. Well, thank you everyone for your good thoughts on this. I think, just more thinking and discussion to happen once we are able to get more information. All right, that brings us to the second public comment period. But you guys are in major comments. Anybody over there on a blue sheet?
Look at it.
Please.
No.
It's one of my public.
growling. John needs to go out.
All right, board member reports. Adam, do you want to start?
Yeah, and I'll be brief in the interest of time. You guys already did a lot of thank yous for donations, so I won't cover that. But we've had a pretty tough couple of weeks here in Averill Park school system between weather and legal issues and staff and all kinds of things. And we've persevered through it. We're a good team. I'm really proud to be part of that team. And I just want to thank you all for, like, everybody does their part in our district, and that's awesome. And that's the only way we get through these times. So Jim, please probably speak for the board, but please pass our heartfelt gratitude all the way across your staff.
Jackie?
I really don't have much, to be honest. I just agree. There's a lot of thank yous. Thank you for everybody for coming tonight. And also, we had some really great events in the district in the last couple of weeks as well, even with the challenges of everything Adam just talked about. And kids keep going, moving on, and everything's going good. So that's it.
Good. Thank you.
Just a couple of things. I want to acknowledge the high school students who made the second quarter honor roll. Congratulations. That went by super fast, like boom, don't blink. Wow. And want to shout out, and I hope everyone in the community comes out this weekend, Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. Our high school students are putting on Little Shop of Horrors. There's been an insane amount of work going into this production. They have really busted their butts and overcome missing a bunch of rehearsals due to weather. Mother Nature is not our friend. And I know that they are just working so hard. The podcast, also thank you for highlighting them on the podcast, because I think, the the community should come out and support the students. Definitely excited to see the production myself. I also want to thank the district for sending out the IEP presentation. As a special education parent, I know that those IEP processes are very hard to understand sometimes. I wasn't able to make the presentation that night. I can't be several places at once, unfortunately. I need a clone. So I was really grateful to see that you sent that out because I think a lot of parents, whether they could or couldn't attend, or sometimes it's just hard to ask a question. So it's really helpful to have that information. So thank you for that. And just really looking forward to all the good stuff we have coming up with spring concerts and all of that stuff. Our kids are crushing it, and I'm always so proud of them. So thanks, and thanks for coming. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Megan. Yeah?
I would like to read you something that I became aware of over this last weekend. And it's really nice to get some good news. So I had some help. So I'm reading this isn't my words, but the Gideon Hawley Teacher Recognition Award commemorates Gideon Hawley, an 1809 graduate of Union College who is distinguished historically for his leadership in education and concern for teacher development in New York State during the 19th century. As the first superintendent of public instruction, he laid the foundations for public elementary schools of the state. The Board of Regents appointed him secretary in 1814, an office held for 27 years. As both superintendent and secretary, he became a dominant figure in New York State education. He was largely responsible for the establishment of the first normal school in New York, which is now State University of New York at Albany. There is this award that is presented to a selected teacher during the Founders Day ceremony in Memorial Chapel this year on February 23rd to school teachers who have had a significant and continuing influence on academic life of Union students. A former Averill Park student, namely my daughter, she nominated Mrs. Christie, and this was her spiel that she sent in for the nomination. And I'm so thrilled you're here.
This is so.
And you get to hear this. I have known all along what an impact Sarah Christie has had on my kids, especially Frankie. But to read this and for Frankie to be over the moon that she received this award. So I want to share this with everyone. Sorry, I'm not great at reading out loud, so I'm sorry. And my liners make it hard to talk. Mrs. Christie was an inspirational educator and role model. Since she taught choir, I was fortunate enough to have her for all 4 years of high school. She found the perfect balance between pushing us to be our best and being compassionate to our struggles. As my high school graduation approached, I found myself spending every spare moment in the choir room, which is a testament to the safe, nurturing environment she made for her students. In my junior year, I went to school in a hybrid format. Every other day, we would go to the school building wearing masks, and in choir, even more safety measures were in place. I stood 12 feet away from half of my treble choir in the auditorium, singing through a mask with a cage under it. On my at-home days, I sang alone in my room on a muted Google Meet. In the choir, we joked about how funny what we were doing was, but none of us ever really actually complained. I fully attribute that to Mrs. Christie keeping us engaged and encouraged with the same witty demeanor as she always had before the pandemic. She kept giving us challenging pieces to work on, and she always held us accountable because she knew what we were capable of. At the end of the year, legal restrictions were letting up a bit, so we began to wonder if we could hold a concert outside. While choir was fun anyway, the concerts always felt like a huge payoff for us and Mrs. Christie because of all of our hard work. We performed spread out on the football field to an audience in the bleachers, with one rehearsal in the parking lot. It was amazing that we were able to put on a show, and it was all thanks to Mrs. Christie. She never talked about it much or expected any big appreciative gesture, but talking to her outside of class, I just saw how much thankless work she was truly putting in, all solely for the love of her students and the music. Her dedication has inspired me in college to do the work, but also advocate for myself where I know I should. In my senior year, no matter if I had a good day, a bad day, or not much happened at all, I was always so excited to tell Mrs. Christie about it after class. She was quick with a joke, as she was with the perfect advice. We exchanged stories about school, me at RPI taking physics and her getting a degree in administration. It was clear as I went through my high school years with her that she was capable of whatever she set her mind to. I found myself counting my stars that I was able to have her as a teacher for all 4 years. She is driven, yet down to earth, passionate, yet logical, and incredibly talented, yet humble. I am truly grateful to have learned from her. So I just want to say, I'm grateful that Frankie was able to have you as a teacher, and I know there are many, many more of them in this district that I'm grateful for, and kind of sad that I don't really have that experience anymore. I mean, right up from Mr. Simpson, you know, and years later, he still remembers all 3 of my kids' names and where they are and what they did, and it's really a testament to this district, and I'm so proud, as Adam said, so proud to be a part of it. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, Sam.
Cheapers, I'm not gonna be remotely as eloquent as that, not even a little bit. You know, I guess the same stuff of just, the building staff who are just above and beyond, like every other meeting, there's some crisis, and, you know, on a boat, we would always talk about how your skill set isn't, you don't get to say you have mastered something until you've mastered it when the lightning and the wind and the lights are going out and you're taking water on, and then now you know what you're doing. And these folks achieved that like years ago. And of course it happened right now. The other thing I just wanted to appreciate the administration, you know, we had, I'm very personally excited about, I don't know if excited is the right word, but gratified that we have the middle school and high school is having the Holocaust survivor virtually visit, and the work that's been done around social emotional work and mental health. COVID seems to be behind us, but I think that it's safe to say even before COVID, there were mental health issues, and to sort of not be like Debbie Downer, but to recognize that things are looking up, you know, we're optimistic, there's more flexibility, and we're moving forward, but to not put those troubles in the dustbin and to not mothball those as well. And I think that this administration, the principals, the staff here is very proactive. There are statistics all over the place about lessons that were learned post-tragedy, and we don't want to be that. We want to be preventative in everything we do, and I think we're working towards that. And I appreciate the steps that you guys are taking to not be those statistics, because I don't think we have to be. It's not a foregone conclusion, and so like lots of positives, and this is also a positive thing. But it's I just appreciate the sort of the focus on the mental health needs of our students, and I can't wait to go see Little Shop Wars on Friday night.
Thank you. I don't think I have anything to add because these guys really said it all and very nicely, but do thank you to all of you, and please pass along that to everyone. Okay, that we do have need for executive session tonight to discuss matters leading to the appointment, employment, discipline, suspension, dismissal, or removal of a particular person or corporation. After that, we will not need to return to open public session. So if I can have a motion to Adam, seconded by Jackie, to move to executive session, and we'll formally adjourn the meeting after. All in favor? Passes unanimously. Thank you all. Thanks for being here tonight. Thanks. Thank you. Yes.